What if you could become the most profitable trader at one of the world's biggest banks? It sounds amazing, right?
Mm.
But what if it came at a cost that, well, few people would believe?
That's quite a thought.
Yeah. So today we're doing a deep dive into the pretty astonishing world of a former Citibank trader, Gary Stevenson. This is someone who went from a really poor background to generating massive profits.
And how he did it is key betting on economic collapse.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you're going to hear about these bizarre entry tests, the sort of hidden culture, the shocking realities of high finance. And this is straight from someone who actually lived it.
Right on the inside.
Our mission really is to pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge from his unique experience. Think of it as, a shortcut to understanding this often hidden world.
We'll definitely unpack his journey, the surprising bits about his daily life, the pressure.
Oh, the pressure and what he learned about the whole system,
Mhm.
from the inside out.
It's a story that really does pull back the curtain on how, well, at least a certain part of the financial world operates. It challenges a lot of assumptions, I think.
For sure. Assumptions about who gets in and what they actually do once they're there.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's get into it. Picture this. Someone expelled from school at 16 for selling cannabis.
Right. Not the typical starting point.
Not at all. From an incredibly poor background, you wouldn't immediately think Citibank trader, would you?
No, you wouldn't.
But Gary Stevenson wasn't typical, and neither was how he got into high finance. Despite that early hiccup, he was apparently really gifted academically. Math, economics. Ended up at the London School of Economics, LSE.
Which is obviously a top school, but even then, you'd think the traditional recruitment path would be tough for him.
He thought so too. He actually described it as incredibly classist, favoring people whose CVs listed things like Junior United Nations founder or concert pianist.
Yeah, stuff that requires a certain background, certain opportunities. His experience was working in a sofa shop and trying to be a grime rapper. Very different world.
Totally different. But he managed to bypass all that traditional stuff. How?
Well, instead of the usual interviews and CV sifting, he won his job in something called a trading game.
A trading game. Seriously, like what kind of game?
He described it as basically a betting game, heavily based on math. But here's the kicker.
Uh-oh. There's always a kicker.
He said he was given a secret advantage. Someone actually explained the rules of the game to him beforehand.
No way. So he knew how it worked.
Yeah, which allowed him to exploit what he called the stupidity of others who are just applying academic probabilities straight up. He could apparently buy low, sell high instantly, make free profit while others were still, calculating.
Wow. So the game itself wasn't exactly a level playing field from the start.
Doesn't sound like it. He found it, quote, stupidly easy because of that edge. And the final round, even stranger.
Wow.
The game was apparently rigged against him this time. He ended up with a hand that was almost mathematically impossible to win with. Like, the other cards were the 7 highest possible cards. A 1 in 15 million chance, something insane like that.
Okay, so he lost the final round then.
Nope. He was still declared the winner.
What? Why?
Because, according to the announcer, his scores in the practice rounds were so high, they wanted to see how he'd react under extreme pressure when everything was stacked against him.
Ah, so it wasn't about winning the rigged game.
It was about how he handled it. He backed himself, kept playing hard even when it looked hopeless, and that's what they apparently wanted to see. It suggests they value that kind of stress-tested gut feeling over just pure book smarts.
Practical intelligence under fire. Makes sense for high-stakes trading, I guess.
Exactly. These games, maybe they're less about IQ and more about finding that specific kind of grit, identifying those, as he put it, crazy people who can thrive when things get chaotic.
So, okay, he gets the job, steps on the trading floor. What's it like? He called it a mad environment.
Yeah, and full of what he called stupid hazing rituals. Like in his first week, they made him go out and buy 100 burgers for the entire trading floor.
100 burgers. That
Yeah.
sounds like something out of a frat house movie, not a global bank.
Right. It really shows how those sort of old boys club vibes were still around, even in a place supposedly about pure merit.
And that was just the beginning, I suppose.
That
What about the perks? We hear stories.
Oh, the perks were nuts. He got taken to Vegas at 21, went to Jay-Z's after party in LA, Carmen Electra's birthday party. He mentioned one night cost him maybe $20,000 or $30,000.
Wow. But for him, coming from where he did,
He felt totally out of place. He said for him, it was just work. It wasn't his social scene like it maybe was for his wealthier colleagues. He actually said he hated it.
that contrast is stark. And the daily grind itself, Must have been intense.
Absolutely. Waking up at 5:30 a.m., cycling to Canary Wharf for a 7 a.m. start. He described these long rows of men with huge walls of screens, like 9 to 12 monitors per person.
12 monitors. And the pace.
A mad rush dealing with customers from about 8 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. Then, surprisingly, he said the afternoons could be quite chill once London handed over trading to New York.
Interesting. What about the stereotype? The Wall Street cocaine-fueled trader thing?
Well, it's fascinating. Gary himself, despite getting kicked out of school for cannabis, apparently never touched cocaine. But he did notice how colleagues could keep up this insane schedule party till 2 or 3 a.m., then be back at their desks by 5 a.m.
How do they manage that?
He only really figured it out later when one colleague admitted to spending something like 80,000 pounds a year on cocaine. Gary had initially just thought the guy was maybe an alcoholic.
80,000 pounds a year. Yeah, it paints a picture.
It does, and it fed into this whole internal culture he described. He called it a pirate ship mentality.
Pirate ship. What did he mean by that?
Like, internal issues were kept. Well, internal. He told a story about one guy stealing money from another trader. The feeling on the desk wasn't, report him to HR. It was, this should have been dealt with between us.
Wow. Sort of an unwritten code.
Seems like it. This pirate ship vibe meant management might look the other way as long as you were making money. Gary said, they're not going to ask how I was making it.
Anything goes if the profit's good enough. He even saw his boss throw a phone at someone's head.
Yeah, apparently. And bizarrely, it seemed to calm the colleague down. It just highlights this really strange, almost lawless atmosphere.
So if it was that wild, how did anything get done? Was it just the money keeping people focused?
That's a really good point. I think that culture shows that the drive for profit often trumped everything else. HR rules, professional conduct, you name it. If you made money, you played by different rules. The order, such as it was, came from the P&L sheet. The control was that shared goal. Make money. Internal squabbles were secondary.
Okay, let's dive deeper then. His actual job. What was Gary doing day to day in this madhouse?
So he was an interest rates trader. That means navigating this incredibly complex, massive market. We're talking trillions of dollars, essentially trying to borrow cheap and lend high, often dealing with really short-term, like overnight positions. It's high volume, needs sharp instincts about where rates might move.
And he moved up quickly.
Yeah, started as a junior on the desk, then got assigned the New Zealand dollar, then the Swiss franc. He was only 22, then the euro, and eventually he ended up trading the yen based in Japan.
And for any trader, but especially there, it sounds like one thing mattered above all else. P&L.
Profit and loss. Absolutely. It wasn't just tracked, it was the only thing that mattered. Calculated daily for every single trader.
And everyone knew everyone else's number.
Yep, circulated on a spreadsheet. Total transparency on performance. Gary actually described this as having a kind of beautiful fairness.
Fairness? How so?
Because it meant someone like him, a kid from basically nowhere, could compete directly with millionaires from privileged backgrounds. If his number was bigger, he was, quote, the guy. Even at 24, performance was the only yardstick.
Okay, so how did he become the guy? What was his big move?
This is where it gets really interesting. In 2011, he became Citibank's most profitable trader globally. Not just on his desk, but in the entire bank.
Ow. What was the trade?
He made a huge bet, essentially, on economic weakness. But it wasn't just predicting a simple recession. He was forecasting something deeper. Yeah, a systemic issue. He called it a growing crisis of inequality. His bet was that the rich would keep getting richer, ordinary people would get poorer, and governments and central banks would have to react in certain ways. And he traded based on those expected reactions.
Betting on inequality itself. That's quite a position to take.
It is, and it brings up a really difficult ethical side to all this.
Like profiting from bad news.
Exactly. Gary himself mentioned making a ton of money from the Japanese nuclear disaster and earthquake in 2011. An event where 20,000 people died.
How did he justify that?
His defense was pretty stark. I didn't make that tsunami happen. It's very reminiscent of that scene in The Big Short, isn't it? Where they realize they're betting against the American economy. And one character points out it means people losing homes, jobs, everything.
Yeah, the discomfort of celebrating profits built on widespread misery.
Right. It highlights this potential internal conflict for traders like Gary. You become brilliant at spotting systemic flaws and predicting crises, but you're profiting from the fallout. the human cost.
He also made a point about risk-taking, didn't he? That it wasn't all high-wire speculation.
Yeah, he kind of punctured that glamorous image a bit. He said most traders, most of the time, actually make their money simply from handling customer orders, facilitating trades for clients, and taking a small cut, not necessarily making huge speculative positions or trying to beat the market themselves.
So less about personal genius bets, more about processing volume.
For many, yes, that's the bread and butter. Gary's own trading volume, though, was immense. He estimated it was probably not far off $1 trillion a day in these very short-term one-day loans.
$1 trillion a day. Wow.
Driven, he said, by management wanting big volume, even if he personally thought some of it was kind of stupid. But volume-generated fees kept the machine running.
So he was doing this high-volume stuff, but also making these massive, successful macro bets. You'd think they'd want to keep him forever. Why did he want out? He said he was actually trying to get fired at one point.
It seems the pressure to stay was intense, but not just positive pressure. He described receiving what he called gangster-like threats from management when he signaled he wanted to leave.
Threats? Like what?
He shared this chilling story his boss told him about a trader from Deutsche Bank who tried to leave, got sued by the bank, and ended up bankrupt. And Gary was directly warned, "We can make life very difficult for you."
Wow. So using legal muscle to keep people in line?
That's certainly how Gary interpreted it. He saw these powerful institutions using lawsuits as an arm of power to control people, especially successful ones who might, know too much or compete against them. He suggested it wasn't always about actual wrongdoing, but about who you pissed off.
So how did he finally manage to leave?
Well, he eventually did get out, but it wasn't clean. They put him on forced gardening leave.
Gardening leave. So paid to stay home.
Exactly. For 18 months, while he was based in Tokyo, he couldn't work for a competitor, couldn't spill any secrets. He apparently spent the time studying Japanese and drawing pictures of the Beatles.
Sounds surreal, but maybe that time gave him perspective.
Hugely important, it seems. It was during that period he had this big realization. He'd made his fortune betting on societal breakdown, on inequality growing. But he realized no one he worked with, not even his wealthy junior colleague, who was just laser focused on the mechanics of the trade, was actually thinking about fixing the problem.
Just profiting from it or ignoring it?
Pretty much. And that led him to this broader conclusion about the whole system.
Which was?
That nobody's trying to fix it. Not the traders, obviously, their incentive is profit. But also not politicians, not academics, not the media, everyone's incentivized differently, focused on their own metrics or audience, not the root cause of inequality.
So what's his purpose now, having made millions betting on the problem?
He's now focused on educational work, trying to explain why inequality matters, how the financial system contributes to it. He actually funds this work through continued trading, interestingly enough, but his goal is to reach new people, folks outside the usual academic or financial bubbles.
And he has a pretty stark warning for the future, right?
Yeah, a dire prediction. He says the rich will get richer and they will eat the middle class alive.
Why? What's the mechanism?
Simple, powerful force. Compound interest. Existing wealth grows exponentially faster than wages or earned income can keep up. This widening gap, he believes, will essentially hollow out and destroy the middle class over time.
That's a heavy forecast.
It is. And he wrote a book using his own life story, the expulsion, the card game win, becoming the top trader, betting on collapse, the bank trying to stop him leaving as a vehicle. A good story, as he put it, hoping that if enough people know that, then we can stop it.
Trying to use his platform.
Yeah.
Though there are still things he can't talk about.
Right. He mentions an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, that prevents him from going into certain details. But in a final kind of bizarre twist that speaks volumes about the power dynamics, he says he can't even legally confirm whether that NDA actually exists or not.
Wow. Layers upon layers of control.
It really paints a picture of a highly competitive, often ruthless, and incredibly self-serving financial world, where huge fortunes can be made by predicting and arguably benefiting from economic pain and instability.
Yeah, it forces you to confront who really benefits when the system seems to be weakening for many. So to recap, we've journeyed through Gary Stevenson's unlikely path into high finance, this sort of mad environment driven by raw profit, where his background didn't matter as much as his knack for the game. And we've seen the blurring lines between ambition, profit, and ethics.
And it leaves us with a pretty provocative thought to chew on. Consider this. If the people right at the top, the ones shaping and navigating global finance, are making fortunes by betting on societal problems worsening, and if, as Gary suggests, they feel no real responsibility to fix those problems, well, who is looking out for the broader health of the world's economy? And what does that ultimately mean for your financial future?